Great. So thanks everyone for being here, and thanks Sasha for inviting me to give this presentation. I want to start by acknowledging many collaborators and students who have contributed to our studies in the Salton Trough and the Gulf of California region over the last 10 to 20 years. And so today I'm going to present evidence for tectonic controls on initiation of the Colorado River about 5 million years ago. And I really want to emphasize the role and importance of transtensional strain in the Paleo-Eastern California shear zone, which caused changes in subsidence rate and regional transgression and regression in the lower river valley. Transtensional strain influenced major fluctuations in river sediment discharge, which then resulted in rapid back and forth migration of the Colorado River Delta early in the river's history. So to do that, we're going to take a quick look at key concepts in sediment routing systems. I'll introduce you to the Gulf of California Salton Trough Transform Rift Margin, and then we'll take a quick look at the stratigraphic record of the birth of the Colorado River at 2 study locations in the Fish Creek Viaceto Basin and the lower Colorado River Valley. So this is a list of recent papers with lots of data that support the conclusions that I'll present to you here today. Now, the concepts and processes of the sediment routing system are well known from studies by Phil Allen and his colleagues and students, and the previous 2 talks have also referred to some of these concepts. And here I'm showing a figure from Michael et al. 2014, a study of the Southern Pyrenees, where they showed that as sediment emerges from an eroding source area, that sediment starts heading down the river transfer system as can be quantified with a volumetric or mass discharge. And the discharge, QS, is inevitably going to decrease in the downstream direction as a result of sedimentation, which extracts the sediment from that discharge load. So if we imagine a river that's working its way through a fault network where active either strike slip or normal faults are causing subsidence along that river network, then the tectonic subsidence is going to trap the sediment and enhance the effect of reducing sediment discharge in the downstream direction. And we can expect this to be an important control on the development of large rivers in tectonically active settings. This is the transform rift plate boundary in the Gulf of California and the Salton Trough, which is accommodating relative motion between the Pacific plate, which moves to the northwest relative to North America. Most of the Gulf of California is dominated by long transform faults, which are accommodating that relative motion. And the Gulf of California shallows from very deep waters of up to 3,000 meters in the south, progressively northward to filled and overfilled basins. And this change in bathymetry is entirely the result of the voluminous input of sediment from the Colorado River over the past roughly 5 million years. And we've seen in previous work that this input of sediment exerts a major control on rift architecture, crustal composition, and lithospheric rupture. And in addition, we want to know, how did that engine start and what were the major processes that controlled initiation and early evolution of the Colorado River? So we can study that through field studies in the lower Colorado River corridor and the Western Salton Trough. And in the lower Colorado River area, the important unit is the 5 to 6 million year old Bowes Formation, which filled a chain of lakes in the north and accumulated in a shallow sea in the south. And we've focused our study in the southern Blythe Basin at the southernmost exposures of the Bowes Formation, and we can correlate those results to similar age deposits in the Fish Creek Viaceto Basin, with the understanding that the Fish Creek Viaceto Basin, when you restore or remove the relative plate motion over the past 5 million years, we see that the Fish Creek Viaceto Basin formed in this position south of Yuma. So we'll go there first. And this is a geologic map of the Fish Creek Viaceto Basin. It's structurally quite complicated, but we don't need to worry about all that complexity right now. What we see is the red and the pink colors represent older crystalline basement rocks, and the basement rocks are overlain by a very thick succession of sedimentary rocks, starting here at the base of the section in Split Mountain Gorge. And what we see here is a 10 to 15 kilometer wide section of sedimentary rock is dipping to the southwest. And this represents about a 5.5 kilometers thick section. And today we're just going to focus on the lower half of that, which is represented over here on the left-hand side. And so the base of this section starts at about 7 or 8 million years ago with alluvial fan conglomerates, and those are directly overlain by marine turbidites. And there's a second sturstrom here, and then that's overlain by the wind caves member of the Latrania Formation, which includes the earliest and oldest Colorado River sands right there at the base of the wind caves member. It passes up into the Coyote clay. And then above the Coyote clay, there's a thick section of sandstill rhythmites and deltaic shallow marine sandstone that passes up ultimately into Colorado River sandstone. So the river finally gets out there after a couple of million years. And so we'll start with a quick look at the wind caves member. And this is a thick bedded sequence of channelized sand-rich turbidites that accumulated in a submarine canyon at about, and the earliest arrival of Colorado River sand is dated at about 5.3 million years old. And I forgot to mention in the previous slide that that the age of these sediments is well constrained by paleomagnetic analysis and hung from the geomagnetic polarity timescale by uranium lead tough ages high in the section. So we can take those, that magnetostratigraphy, and then correlate it to some microfossil ages low in the section and have a lot of confidence about the age of these events. And so that's how we determine this age for the arrival of the Colorado River sand. And then we can use the dimensions and age range of the wind caves member to estimate its discharge averaged over 100 to 200,000 years. And we get a discharge rate of about 6 to 20 megatons per year, which is a nice average for many kind of typical rivers, but it's actually much, much less than the long-term geologic average of 150 to 200 megatons per year, which we worked out in a prior study. So the wind caves member is overlain by the Coyote clay, which is an ultra fine-grained sand-starved marine clay that records the shutdown of sand delivery from the Colorado River at about 5 million years ago. And then that passes up into the Arroyo Diablo Formation, which is the deposit of the Colorado River sands as they actually arrived in the Salton Trough. Now, we found out that the deposition of these fluvial sands accumulated during rapid subsidence in the basin, which requires a very large increase in the sediment flux rate to counteract that rapid subsidence. And that's consistent with our calculation of the very large discharge averaged over 5 million years. So if we look upstream at the correlative record in the lower Colorado River Valley, as I said earlier, that's going to be the 5 to 6 million year old Bowes Formation. And we'll look at it here in the southern Blythe Basin. Excuse me. And we see in this area that the Bowes Formation consists of 3 main members: the basal carbonate, the siliciclastic member, and the upper bioclastic member. And importantly, we recognize that the siliciclastic member records the arrival of the Colorado River and its delta at about 5.3 million years ago. So we'll step through just quickly. So the basal carbonate member of the Southern Bowes Formation accumulated in a tidal strait complex, which was bounded by faults, which controlled this interesting dogleg, which you can see in the map pattern here. And this is a cross-section view of that fault-bounded sag basin. And the deposits of the basal carbonate member contain lots of distinctive sedimentary structures that indicate that it's formed in a tidal depositional system. And that depositional system, that tidal strait, connected the Gulf of California in the south to a large inland sea farther north. And overlying that is a siliciclastic member, which consists of a sort of a basal green claystone that's overlain by red mudstone and siltstone with weak paleosols, and then some pretty impressive multi-story trough cross-bedded fluvial sandstone that represents the earliest deposits of the Colorado River. And so this is a systematic coarsening upward section, which can be readily interpreted as the result of a prograding delta system with the pro-delta clays overlain by delta front and channel mouth bar sands, and then the arrival of the river channel deposits themselves. So this clearly is a record of the first arrival of the Colorado River in the lower river valley. at about 5.3 million years ago. And I'll just say that with the age controls on the bows are not that good, but we do have some 4M biostratigraphy that allows us to correlate these deposits to the Fish Creek Viaceto section. But what's really interesting is that, so we've got the river coming out, and that's all great, except that the siliciclastic sands are overlain by the upper bioclastic member. So we'll take a quick look at that. And the upper bioclastic member of the Southern Bows Formation is a shallow marine deposit that records reflooding of the lower Colorado River Valley after the river first ran through it. We see lots of water lane, subaqueous types of sedimentary structures, and even some poorly sorted stratified conglomerate that appears to have been deposited in response to tsunamis. And the marine origin of this unit is confirmed with the presence of a coralline-like calcareous red algae, as well as other marine fossils, including echinoid spines, barnacles, clams, and forams. So we can look at this then in a paleogeographic reconstruction. And we start with a basal carbonate member at 6 to 5.5 million years ago, which we have shown formed in a fault-bounded subsiding tidal strait, which connected the Gulf of California in the south, including the Fish Creek Viaceto Basin down here, with a larger shallow inland sea in the north. And so the presence of this tectonic lowland subsiding on faults and connecting the lower valley to the Gulf of California Seaway, that provided the pathway for the first arriving Colorado River, which advanced very quickly down through that channel network, and actually was a significant enough discharge at that time to create a sediment flux down to the wind that formed the Wind Caves member in the Fish Creek Viaceto Basin. And we've dated that at about 5.3 million years.
Okay, so, you have 11 minutes now.
What's that?
You're at 11 minutes now.
Okay, thank you.
Remind you.
I'll be wrapping it up pretty soon. And so what happens next in this reconstruction is the unexpected part, where the delta retreated more than 100 kilometers back up into the Colorado River Valley. And that's when we deposit the upper bioclastic member, which records the reflooding of the lower river valley, and the Coyote clay here in the south, which also is a signal of the shutdown of sand delivery to the basin. And we attribute that to sediment trapping along the river corridor. Now, we can also explore the controls on delta transgression and regression by correlating our section in the lower Colorado River Valley with that in the Salton Trough, and then compare it to the global sea level curve. And I'm skipping over lots of details here, but we can see that the initial transgression that brought in marine turbidites and the basal carbonate member is a result of tectonic subsidence, which actually was occurring along the entire length of the Gulf of California at that time. And then we have the first input of Colorado River sand into the basin and working its way down through that channel network, probably as a result of some climate change, which led to the filling and spilling of lakes from off of the Colorado Plateau. So there was a climate change, it became wetter at that time, and that initial input probably has something to do with that climate change. The next step is a little less expected, and we think that this transgression that deposited the upper bioclastic member on the Coyote clay resulted from a significant decrease in the sediment output and accentuated by tectonic subsidence. And finally, we have another increase, a major increase, which led to the long-term voluminous sediment discharge from the Colorado River, which brought in the Bullhead alluvium and eventually prograded the river sandstones all the way down to the Salton Trough. Now, what we can see is that global sea level was not a major factor in these events because there was little or no change in global sea level during that time. And any changes in the global signal that we do see are opposite to the observed changes in relative sea level in the stratigraphic record. But what we do have is a published record of a significant pulse of extension and subsidence in the Death Valley area in the Eastern California shear zone right at about 5 million years ago. Now, the dates are not super precise, but they line up sufficiently well that we think that this is a plausible mechanism that could explain trapping of sediment along the river corridor, which was bounded by faults during that time, could cause a significant decrease in the sediment discharge to result in that unexpected transgression of the delta back up into the river valley. So, so what we have is a record of highly punctuated sediment discharge and very rapid back and forth advance and retreat of the delta during the emergence of the Colorado River. And this is a kind of unexpected result, which means it's still kind of controversial. But it's pretty well supported with lots of data right now. And it just helps us to highlight the importance of tectonic controls on the initiation and early evolution of the Colorado River, with a particular emphasis on the role of the Eastern California shear zone at that time, which was a transtensional strike slip normal fault network, which could have was very, very well situated to accomplish that sediment trapping. So we suggest that this might also be important for the emergence and development of other continental scale rivers in tectonically active settings. So thanks for your attention. I'll be happy to take questions.
Thanks a lot for this amazing overview. Any questions? Please type them in the chat or raise your hand if you like.
Should I stop the share or keep it
No,
going?
leave it on. Maybe we have to go to some
Okay.
slides. If there's no question right away, then I'll start. You have this amazing record of sedimentation of different lithologies, and you showed some of these faults of the San Andreas fault, but also some of these other strike slip faults and their interaction faults in the paleogeographic frame. How well do you know these faults, and can we use the sediments as a recorder of fault network activity in the area?
Well, of course, I think that we can use sediments as a recorder of fault activity. When you're in the southern San Andreas fault zone per se, you're in very direct proximity to plate boundary faults, which are accommodating, you know, the majority of the plate motion. And those are really big signals, and you can go find those faults, and they're more readily mapped. I will say that when you get up into this area of the southern Bowles Formation and the faults that controlled sedimentation in this area are much more subtle, and they're harder to find. They are out there. And so it's just more difficult. It requires really detailed mapping, and you begin to also recognize this more subtle signals in the stratigraphy, such as growth structures and wedging patterns and certain geometries that are characteristic of structures that form associated with normal faults, which you have to really look for, and they can be hard to find. But so it becomes more difficult in the Eastern California shear zone. Yep.
Okay, thanks. Anyone else? Otherwise, I have another question that's burning. Could you think of the signal that you have, your transgression regression cycles? Could that also be a signal of dynamic topography?
Oh, that's a neat idea. Yeah, I'm a big fan of that, actually, and I suppose it could. Yeah, we stratigraphers have to really be on the lookout for that. I think one thing you might do is look for the directionality of the signal. What direction is it moving, as a clue to that? Because we can see that dynamic topography is going to force the lithosphere up and down. We might expect it to propagate through. I haven't thought about that very much, honestly. You have to. I'll have to get back to you on that. It's a very good question.
Let's discuss that later on.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Two more questions, and because we're at the end, there's no time to discuss the questions in the chat, so let's just stay longer than expected. Linda, you are first.
Yeah, sorry. Hi, Becky. Sorry, that was very slow. Really great talk, absolutely fascinating. I was just wondering about the trapping of the sediment. So do you think it's still being generated upstream and just not making it down to the outlet where you've accumulated it previously? And that is a function of the tectonics? Or do you think something might have changed upstream that doesn't allow the same volume of sediment to be generated?
Right. Right. So there's a big source area up there. It's called the Colorado Plateau. And I didn't really try to unravel any of that. If there was some damming or trapping all the way up on the Colorado Plateau, or if you like turned off erosion, I think that once you start that erosional engine, it's going to be very hard to turn that off. So I can't imagine a magical switch which is going to say, okay, stop eroding the Colorado Plateau. You could imagine diversion, like, for example, if the river first was going to the north and then it decided to come out here, then maybe did it go to the north or something? Did it go someplace else for a period of time? But I think that's highly unlikely because the river didn't really exist prior to, well, it was working its way slowly through an uplands region that had no outlet between 10 and 5 million years ago. So it existed, but it wasn't really going anywhere because it was all much slower. Once it gets connected down to sea level, it's gonna stay connected, I think. And then there may have been some river capture events up on the plateau, but only what they would do would be to enlarge and make the source area, the catchment, larger, not smaller. So it's hard to think of a process that would just somehow shut down the delivery off of the Colorado Plateau. But if I've missed something, please let me know.
No, I was just wondering, you mentioned there was a change in climate at the same time, but is that drier or wetter?
No, that would have been, so the climate was getting, I think, and there's limited data on this, that the climate was became wetter right at the end of the Miocene. And that's probably why you finally filled up those lakes. So during the middle to late Miocene, most of the middle to late Miocene, the Colorado Plateau was dry. And so it had a number of high closed basins like the Altiplano or something today. It's just like nothing was even getting out of there. But then with increased moisture and rainfall, you started filling up those lakes. And that's what led to the final filling and spilling and the connection of that new river system out to the ocean. So that was a definite result of the increased rainfall and a wetter climate right at the end of the Miocene. And we see really good evidence for this in the Bows Formation itself as well.
Super, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Jeffrey. I think that answers your question as well. Björn, you go next. I can't hear you properly. Björn, you seem to have problems with your connection. Then Luca, could you go next?
Yeah, we'll do that while Björn sorts the microphone. Thank you very much for this talk. It was a fantastic little trip through time and space. I had a question regarding the role of this amazing amount of sediment that is delivered in this Paleo East California shear zone, and does that affect the intensity of that maze of active faults to be able to quickly plug any local basins, because you have this feeding of sediments from the Paleogeographic River? Or maybe essentially my question can be simply, would it look the same without that input of sediment in that maze of the shear zone?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. I think we have some insight into that from the part of the Bows Formation that predates the arrival of the sediment. And in the south, actually, there's a basal carbonate throughout most of the system, but it's a lacustrine carbonate in the north, and then it transitions down to a shallow marine tidal carbonate in the south. And that probably gives you an insight into an answer to that question, which is, I think that those lakes got fairly deep in the north, although the water depth is not really well known. But with water, if you have water without sediment, then you can form fairly deep lakes. Although in the south, it never really was very deep. It got deeper. I think that you then have other controls on water depth, which are going to be, relative sea level. And in the south, it's relative sea level. And in the north, it's more like your water budget and the height of your structural sills and things. So really, you have a series of lakes connecting down to a shallow marine embayment where you can play around with water depth. independent of the sediment supply. I guess those are my thoughts on that.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay, it seems Björn's microphone didn't work, but I quickly read his question and then we have to wrap up. He was wondering whether you have considered shortening structures related to strike slip and transtension. They may destroy accommodation and affect sediment transport.
Yeah, that's, you know, most of the structures that we see out there are transtensional. There are zones of transpression within the Eastern California shear zone, clearly, but the architecture that we see at that time, as documented by the Southern Bows Formation, really we don't see any evidence for transpression or shortening structures during that period. What we really see is evidence of normal fault types of structures and extension and transtension as a result of linking strike slip faults across releasing stepovers. So I'd certainly be on the lookout for transpressional structures, but we did not see any during that particular period of time.